Is it right to fight? Young people today are facing just that question. Many are eligible for the draft and for duty in Vietnam, and all of them will be voters, citizens in a nation thrust into world leadership. Town meeting recently raised the question with high school and college students and their teachers. First, at Anoka, Minnesota, town meeting visited the senior high school. Younger students in general seem not strongly concerned, but for seniors, many of whom have already registered for the draft, it's another story. Dennis Colvin discussed Vietnam in his class in 20th Century American History.
Do you feel that by escalating the war, perhaps we could achieve more of our goals? This seems to be the major topic of debate during the first part of 1967.
Well, in Life magazine yesterday, they had these pictures of foreign ships bringing supplies in to the harbors, and I think it's just ridiculous that we don't mine these harbors. Once we get the materials, once they get the materials on the land, then we're given permission to bomb these materials, and it would just be so much easier to stop these materials before they get into North Vietnam itself.
Yeah, I think that in addition to our commitment, we have sent soldiers into Vietnam, and I think that if we are to fulfill our commitment to our soldiers, we should escalate the war to a safe level that has been admitted by others, such as mining the ports. But I think we're also overlooking a political goal which we have achieved, because Premier Key has brought Vietnam's first constitution to President Johnson at Guam. And also in Time magazine it says that an additional token of political progress is that the first village and hamlet elections since 1964 will get underway next week in South Vietnam. Within 6 months, national presidential elections will be held. And I feel that if a country has made such a dramatic change from the old feudal system to a democracy, I think this is all the more an incentive for us to stay in Vietnam and bring the war to a peaceful end as soon as possible.
I believe that it's necessary for us to escalate our military action in this war because the North Vietnamese have indicated that they will not negotiate. North Vietnam is overcrowded, and they feel that they need to unify the whole country under their command. They want South Vietnam, they want the country for their own. And I don't think the old leaders just will not negotiate. They haven't shown any signs of it. I mean, we have to convince them that we're winning and they can't win.
The point now is, how are we going to win? Are we going to stay there maybe 15 years and possibly outweight them, so to speak, or are we going to go in and get the war over with? And I feel that the American public, and especially we in this room here, would expect them to, as Chuck says, use our all-out power and get the war over with. This is a burden on the country. It's a burden on our world policies, our trade relations with other nations, and our foreign relations with other nations. We should get this problem out of the way, and through doing this, we can prove to the communists that they cannot defeat us through aggression.
If we escalate the war too much going to North Vietnam, that makes the United States an aggressor nation, and I think we may be overstepping our promises and what our goals are. And also I feel that you can't stop in Vietnam. It's not communism and the free world are fighting throughout the world more than in just Vietnam. It's a fighting war in Vietnam, but it's a Cold War throughout the rest of the world. And even if we did win a victory in Vietnam, I don't think it would stop there.
I think that Ann is making a mistake when she says that if we went into North Vietnam, that we'd be guilty of aggression. Because first of all, I think this would be something like saying that when we invaded Europe, Fortress Europe on D-Day, that we were engaging in aggression. Because the communists oppressed this country. They came in and took it from the French in the first place. There is an illegitimate government, in my opinion, because they took it by force, and the only right they rule by is the right of force. If we go into North Vietnam, as I'd be in favor of, we'd merely be liberating these people. And I know that you hear a lot about liberation, and that you can put that in quote marks a lot of times because many people use it as a cover, as the communists do, for actual oppression of peoples. But in our case, if American forces went there, it would be for the true cause of liberation.
May I ask this question? Do you people feel that the divisiveness of the American people over the issue of Vietnam, how deeply is this hurting us?
Well, I believe that this really is hurting our, for one thing, the morale of our soldiers in Vietnam, because I think they hear all this news of the
the breakdown between the two factions in the United States that we should pull out or that we should keep going. And it's really, I would think that it would make them feel that we aren't completely behind them there. And I think that it might also affect the South Vietnamese in that they might feel that we aren't completely behind them in Vietnam.
I know that all of you people are very concerned about the draft. Most of you people are of draft age. And for that reason, I know we're all concerned about the fact that the current draft legislation expires in June. President Johnson has made some rather startling proposals concerning the draft, particularly drafting the 19-year-olds first. What is your opinion of this? Paul?
Well, I favor drafting 19-year-olds first. However, I do not agree that undergraduate deferment should be eliminated. I think that students should be able to complete their 4 years of college and then be thrown into the lottery as everyone else is.
Yeah, I think the draft is just part of a larger picture which gets down to giving back to our country for all the good things it has given to us. And I think by that we mean a contribution to our society to better it. And I feel that by fulfilling a military commitment, you are, in a very self-sacrificing way, paying back to your country for people who have not only died for you, but have also molded our country through Congress and such.
I don't feel that President Johnson's proposal even goes far enough. I think that on the present system of the draft, and even his proposal is really unfair. I feel that we should have an all-out registration of all people at 16, including girls and boys, and that everyone should have to serve, like Terry said, to serve for their country. And like the present way we have it now, some people get out because their IQ is lower, and we're sending the most intelligent young men we have over there.
Well, the idea of universal service sounds good, but I think it's completely impractical, because right now I think we're drafting something like 1 out of every 20 who are available, and if we included all people, regardless of their physical defects and things like this, and if we also included women, this would probably mean that right now we're drafting 1 out of 50 people who could be drafted, and this would be, if we had some sort of service for all of these people, this would be a monstrous system that would cost billions and billions of dollars. And in most cases, it would just be creating service for the sake of service.
And I think that we should cut down on our deferment so that more people do have a chance to serve. And I think that by doing this, by encouraging people to serve like this, we'll be making the situation such that the young people take less for granted in the United States today. And I think that we'd cut down a lot on the complaints of the kids when they're drafted.
Do you find many of these young people cynical about the war and what the kind of life and the kind of world the older generation has passed on to them?
No, I don't believe so. I think this is a fallacy. I think a lot of people feel that the young people are cynical, and I don't agree. I think many of them are very seriously interested in solving problems, not just explaining them as being someone else's work.
Thoughtful young people in the high school seemed basically to support American involvement in Vietnam. But there is ample evidence the attitude on college campuses is much more varied. With young people a few years older, many away from their homes and the influence of parents, there's more questioning, more protest over American military activity in Southeast Asia. Town meeting is on the campus of the University of Minnesota. We're talking to various people here, faculty members and students passing by, and gathering opinion about the Vietnam issue. You're on the faculty here at the university?
Yes, I'm an assistant professor in the physiology department.
What is your name, sir?
James Beck.
I notice that you're among a group making a silent protest on the Vietnam War.
Yes, this is a group of individuals representing no particular organization or organizations which has been holding a silent vigil every week, Wednesday from noon till 1 o'clock since early last September.
What kind of people have gathered here?
Well, there are a number of faculty members, quite a number of students, and people from off campus, housewives, a physician or two, and various representatives, workers, and the like. And our group is sometimes 50 or more people, and even during the winter, we've had very good turnout. We feel that we communicate with quite a few people who pass by in a silent way, and most of us feel we need to communicate any way we can.
Let me ask you why you personally are protesting.
Well, my protests are mainly based on the moral issues and secondarily on the political issues involved in the Vietnam situation. I think American involvement is wrong, amounts to virtually aggression. We are there claiming reasons which are perhaps the most improbable in history, because there's no semblance of any government there, representative of the people, that has asked us to be there. We're violating all our own principles of self-determination and our principles opposing retaliation, which we've enunciated over and over in the UN. And now our president overtly admits that our raids on North Vietnam, for example, are retaliation. We're eradicating the population of Vietnam, largely civilians, for no reason. There's no moral justification for this, and it's politically dead wrong.
My name is Don Beaufet, and I'm a student at the University of Minnesota.
Don, are you in the ROTC program here?
Yes, I'm in the Navy ROTC unit, and I'll be getting commissioned in the Marine Corps in June 1968.
Don, right here in front of the ROTC building has been a group of protesters. They gather every week, and I'm sure you've seen them. How do you feel about this?
Well, I feel it's their right as an American to protest the war if they feel they should, but it seems to me that what we're doing in the war is trying to guarantee the right to protest, as these people are doing. And it's just sort of a self-defeating thing to protest the right of other people to be able to protest like this.
My name is Karen Craning. I'm a student at the University of Minnesota.
Karen, you're on your way to join the weekly protest vigil group. What's your own personal protest about Vietnam?
Well, the main reason I'm in the movement is because I believe the war in Vietnam to be immoral and unhumanitarian. I think if the United States got out of Vietnam, a lot less suffering would be going on among both the American soldiers and the people of Vietnam, both South and North.
Do you advocate our leaving right now?
Yes, I do.
My name is Ross Peterson. I'm a senior in the university and a member of the Navy ROTC.
That means, Ross, that you'll be subject to duty probably in Vietnam quite soon. How do you feel about this?
Yes, sir. Right now, as far as I can see, the United States requires very little of people, and military obligation is something that is one of the few things that is expected of a person, and therefore I think it's going to be very important to me, and I think it's one reason why I justify the fact that I'm going over there. And I do have qualms about it, but still, it's something that has to be done.
My name is Larry Golden. I'm a graduate student in the political science department here at the university.
Larry, how do you feel about the draft?
Well, generally, I've been looking at the situation as far as the recent draft proposals of the president are concerned. I happen to feel that there should be an alternative service available to all young people who would desire it, rather than forcing them to participate in the armed forces of the country. I think this is practical. I think it's been shown that the country can support a professional army if it so desires. And I think that it would give young people in school and out of school the opportunity to serve the country in a more constructive and certainly in a more conscientious manner than they would if they were just forced to serve in the armed forces.
You have a student deferment. Would you serve in Vietnam if necessary?
Well, I have a student deferment, that's correct, and my feeling is presently that if I were drafted, I would probably refuse to go. The reasons for this are twofold. Mainly that if I were drafted now, I know that the reason I would be drafted is because of the Vietnam War and not because of the fact that the country merely desired my services. In this case, I think I can't say unalterably because I'm not under the situation, but I think that under my present convictions that I would refuse to participate in any way in the armed forces in any way that would support the war in Vietnam. If I were drafted normally, I'm afraid I would be in a bit more of a dilemma, because then my refusal would have to be based on grounds of Vietnam, and I might go in the service and then just refuse to go to Vietnam. But if I were drafted now, I think I would probably refuse to participate in any way.
Where do you stand in the draft?
Well, I'm medically discharged from the United States Military Academy, so I'm 4F and can't be inducted.
That means that you could be pretty objective about this. How do you feel about the draft in relation to other people on the campus?
Well, I think there are some, what I really think is that it's not completely fair to do it randomly because certain students have abilities that should be directed toward education and shouldn't be neglected through a 3-year, 4-year draft period.
Do you think we could adequately defend United States interests with a volunteer army?
No, but I think that the draft, the way it's managed now, will take many of the people that would be unemployed normally into the service and be an asset to our country because they're not unemployed.
You've just gotten out of service, have you?
That's right, I got out 3 weeks ago.
Did you see any duty in Vietnam?
No, I did not, but a lot of my friends did, and they all want to go back.
Was that the way they feel about it, really? Why do they want to go back?
Well, they feel they're doing some good, and they think that, well, it's the place where they can do the most good, so they want to go back there.
How do they feel about the people of Vietnam? Do they feel that they're really behind the government?
Well, the places these guys were at were mainly in the way out in the backwoods, more or less, and they weren't really too sure that the people knew completely the big picture. They think maybe they know of what yesterday, what's today, and what's tomorrow, and that's about as far as they can see.
But they think maybe we need to take hold and be responsible then.
Well, one of them said he didn't like the idea, but he didn't of us being the big daddy, since we've been called one so often, but he says he thinks in this case we'd almost have to.
My name is Kathy Reynolds. I'm a junior at the University of Minnesota.
Kathy, how do you feel about the draft?
Well, actually, I think that the ideal situation would be a universal draft. I'm sick of hearing about draft dodgers, and I've had my fill of it. It's actually, I think, a very small percentage of the people, and the picture is way overblown.
You don't think there are too many real draft dodgers?
Well, as far as students go, I don't. This draft card burning bit is completely overblown. As far as this school, most people are very responsible about serving, and especially serving in Vietnam. They feel that it is a responsibility that we have taken and that we should follow it through. That's the way I feel also. I mean, it's not an ideal situation over there, but we're in it.
And you would say that we need now to pursue it to a victorious end?
Yeah, I'm afraid I would. It's not shiny anymore. I'm not idealistic about it anymore, but I don't want to give up.
Town meeting is in the Newman Center on the campus of the University of Minnesota, and we're going to chat for a moment with Father Conroy, chaplain here at the Newman Center. Father, you have gathered for us here a panel of young men who are concerned.
Yes, and they're not average students.
How did you get them?
Well, as a matter of fact, it's very interesting. I didn't have much time. Lauren Halverson asked me to do this just recently. As a matter of fact, when they were away from school, and this is only the third day of school right now, and so I started after them yesterday, the day before Monday, the day before yesterday. And, well, they're interested in doing this sort of thing. And they have a fundamental kind of, well, either it's courage or it's nonsense. I don't know which. They're willing to stick their neck out and say something, and sometimes it's called courage. And I think in this case, especially, I know of a couple of them, it is courage, because two of the students that I've asked to do this have no definite point of view in regard to our involvement itself. They're trying to understand it as citizens, as university students, and as human beings who have some moral association with our national or governmental commitment.
Father, let's meet these young men whom
Good. I think you're going
Newman
to
Center.
enjoy your conversation with them very much.
Good.
Well, my name is Darrell Fashing, and I'm a philosophy major at the University of Minnesota, and presently am the president of the Newman Student Association.
My name is Jack Graham, and I've just graduated from law school at the university, and I was also a philosophy major when I was an undergraduate, and I was privileged to be one of the founding members of the Conservative and Liberal Americans Against the War in Vietnam, which is a campus organization.
My name is Lee Smith, and I'm a senior majoring in journalism and history. I'm currently the chairman of the University Chapter of Students for a Democratic Society, And I might also mention in this discussion I'm also a member of the United Presbyterian Peace Fellowship.
I'm Charles Hirsch, and I'm a junior in liberal arts. I have no affiliation here on campus.
Well, my name is Bill Overmo, and I'm a junior and a political science major. I'm vice chairman of the Republican Association, and that's the group I'm representing here today.
I'm Dennis Watley. I'm an English major, and I'm a member of the Young Democrats and of the Student Senate.
These campus leaders from the university engaged in some lively discussion on Vietnam, and this was some of it.
The problem that arises for me in view of what you've raised about the nature of man's aggression and the whole gist of the conversation up to now is a problem of collective morality versus the individual morality. And it's troubled me that I don't think there can be a just war, and it's certainly, I think, on Christian grounds that that's true. And it's troubled me that churchmen within my own faith, Catholic faith, such as bishops and what have you, cardinals, have on occasion come out apparently in favor of the war. I don't understand this, and I would like to know what does the individual, young men our age, who are being called into the draft, have as a choice if he doesn't feel that the war is just. It seems to me that we're left with a conscientious objector position, but quite often conscientious objectors opt for a position of, say, going to jail. And it seems to me by that they're abandoning their moral responsibility to the community and saying, lock me up, I want to forget about it. I think they have at least the moral obligation to serve in the military in a creative capacity, and I think they can do this, as Quakers, for example, often have, by serving in the medical corps. What are your reactions to this?
I think that the primary obligation is to refuse to fight. My personal position is that all war is wrong, and that one should not fight in any war. Because of this, I fall under the existing legislation on conscientious objectors, and I can therefore do alternative service, either, as you mentioned, in the military, or as other Quakers do, I can do service of a non-military nature, which is what I choose to do. I think this is correct, but I was mentioning before that people who don't share my belief that all wars are unjust consider this war unjust. And the General Assembly of my church, the United Presbyterian Church, in its last session, passed a resolution saying that the church would support those who refused to fight in this particular war in Vietnam, and those people, in all likelihood, would be sent to prison. And I think that if your conscience tells you this war is evil, but you don't believe that all wars are evil, you ought to refuse to fight. And if that means going to prison, then that's not a forfeiture of your own moral responsibility. I think the blame of that rests on the state.
Well, Bill, how do you feel then about the administration's handling of the war in Vietnam? Well, as a Republican, I certainly can't give a blanket endorsement to every action the administration has taken, but I do agree with the overall thrust of the policy there. For a number of reasons. I think perhaps one of the most important is that what we're really fighting in South Vietnam isn't an enemy on the ground, but what we're fighting is a new kind of revolutionary warfare, the so-called War of National Liberation. Now, we've had guerrilla warfares with us for many years, from the times of the Greeks through Napoleon to the present. But in Vietnam, we have a unique situation in which one country, contiguous to another land, is attempting to stir up revolution using its forces and its materiel and its men in that land to which it borders. And I would suggest certainly that unless we can prove in South Vietnam that this tactic isn't going to deceive us, that we recognize it as aggression, unless we can prove this and make the point very clearly, all we're going to do is encourage this same kind of warfare throughout the world. Now, that isn't entirely a domino theory, but I do think it's valid to say that if we don't make the point in Vietnam, we're going to see the same kind of situation arising throughout, particularly the underdeveloped world. As a result, I think we have to stay. Dennis,
I would
what's your
question
comment?
the premise that Bill started out with, and that is that you assume that a government, the top level of a government, represents some kind of consensus in society. I would suggest that this is a totally unwarranted act of faith. And while there's a perfectly good place in this world for acts of faith, I don't think it's here. I would suggest that there is serious reason to be skeptical about whether the opinion at the top of our government represents any kind of consensus among the American people for two reasons. One, I would question whether there is any kind of consensus among the American people. I mean, from poll to poll, you get different reactions to the war. And depending upon current events or depending upon whether Mr. Johnson is at a press conference within the last week, the assessments of his activities and his Vietnam position goes up and down. And I think the second reason why we needn't necessarily assume that Mr. Johnson represents the American people is because there has at no point been a validation of that representation. In the last congressional elections, there was no way for people who opposed the war to vote for candidates, except in one case here in Minneapolis there was, fortunately. But around the country, generally no. Very seldom do you have a congressman who has the courage to stand up and oppose the war, even if he privately opposes it, because there's all the political pressure of the executive branch of the government on these people to keep quiet. This is not representativity, and I don't think that we have any reason to predicate a whole military policy on a theory of representation, which I don't think has a great deal of basis in fact, particularly on the Vietnam issue.
I find Bill's attitude somewhat objectionable, mainly because he still hasn't overcome the fundamental objection that our boys are being used in Vietnam in a war which contravenes international law, the Constitution of the United States. I don't believe that patriotism is conformity. I don't believe that we're a government of consensus. I believe that we're a government of laws, laws designed to preserve the dignity and independence and liberty of individual citizens.
It seems to me...
I'd just like to make one short comment on the nature of the wars of national liberation, and the fact that this is again a tactic of some enemy. I say the way to stop revolutions is not by dropping more bombs on Vietnam, but to remove the conditions of oppression that exist around the world where guerrilla activity threatens, and you don't remove oppression with guns.
There's a tremendous amount of confusion, I think, on whether there's any kind of consensus. We had Senator McCarthy speak here at Newman about 2 weeks ago, and the gist of the impression he left with us then was that even the Senate is confused, and there's no consensus in the Senate. And that, as a matter of fact, they were hoping that Mr. Johnson knew something that they didn't know. And it appears to me that what we have is a military war being decided by the military, and they're hoping that the military themselves knows what's going on. I don't think the people in the United States know what's going on.
Well, I think we have to get back to a basic point here. I'm not approving of specific policies, but I will say this. I think every responsible survey that's been taken and every index of popular opinion we've seen indicates that the overwhelming majority of the American people support the principle of, as Mr. Nixon calls it, no reward for aggression in Vietnam. Now, we disagree on specific means of implementation, but I think most people support that overall goal.
And I would say that then we have to get down and define this whole situation. We have to define it politically, legally, and we have to get this consensus. There's got to be serious study, and then morally, it's got to be left up to the individual, and he has to have the room open to him, especially if he is to elect to serve in the army, or if he is forced to, as it is this situation right now.
I might just comment on the fact about being forced to serve in the army. Had an interesting condition up until recently. The new draft program calls for the drafting of a new from a new constituency. That's middle-class persons in college, and up until now we've had the draft mainly falling on people who are not in college because of the 2S deferment. And I think this has placed college students in a position where their commitment to the war has had to be no more than verbal.
Is it right to fight? These have been some of the widely differing responses of young people on the campus of university and high school. But most of the younger generation seem to take the question seriously, and often the answers show uncommon conscience and responsibility. Is it right to fight? Town meeting raises the question and invites your answer.